hello everybody, and thank you for coming to the session on education. My name is Vicky Blake, and I am an NEC member in UCU, University and College Union. And just to tell you a little bit about myself before I introduce the speakers, so that you kind of get a bit of my context. I was UCU president from June 2020 to 2022, and before that I had been the vice president. So I actually contracted COVID just before the lockdown, and believe that I caught it at a negotiation with the employers, because almost our whole team of negotiators got sick at the same time. And I developed what we first were calling post-viral fatigue, and then later called long COVID after that. So from the very beginning, I think COVID and long COVID and the risks have been very present to me. And actually in yesterday's session, I found myself wondering how I might have understood things had I not been so affected early on. That's quite an interesting thing to think about. In UCU, we had a huge influx of very, very worried members before the lockdown began, getting really concerned about the need to stop in-person teaching in both further education and higher education sectors. We represent members of both teaching and academic related staff in further education, higher education, prison education, adult and community education. So there's quite a variety of settings people were very worried about. And then in the kind of period leading up to the September-October return that was planned in higher education, we resisted very strongly the return to in-person teaching, and we're trying to push very seriously for mitigations to a varying degree of success, I would say. But we were very prominent at that period of time. And I would also say that we have had a huge amount of casework connected both to mitigations and also reasonable adjustments as a result of not only long COVID either exacerbating or creating new conditions that people were having to deal with, but also in terms of how COVID had exacerbated pre-existing conditions for a lot of our members. And I think I was reflecting after yesterday's session that there were a lot of things that we got in place in certain places that were sort of adhered to for a while, and this theme of constant vigilance came up again and again yesterday. And my honest feeling is that we've lost a lot of those mitigations that we did have, and they weren't enough in the first place. So this has been a really useful session yesterday, and I think it will be again today. We're going to have several speakers for you who I'll introduce in a moment. We will have the chat switched off while the speakers are presenting, just because it's less distracting that way. But you will see in the chat some links which Hilda has put in there that are useful. So that includes a Google Drive link. We've got links to the Hazards Campaign Twitter, various different flyers and guides in there. So there's lots of information in there. And I'll also ask Hilda to pop that into the chat again just before we go into the groups, in case anyone has joined slightly later in this session. So the speakers that we have today are Natalie, I'm very sorry if I end up pronouncing your name incorrectly, but Natalie Bain-Regius. We also have Wayne Bates and Ruth Brooker, and then we're going to hear from Janet just at the end with a declaration for education. So Natalie is a researcher of IAQ in schools and is going to be looking at what standards are needed in education versus what the government standards are. So I think you're going to share your screen, Natalie. So do you want to just click the necessary buttons, and then when you're ready, you'll have around 5 minutes, and I'll start waving at you when you're starting to run out of time. Okay, whenever you're ready, if you want to.
Sorry, my computer is a bit slow.
Oh, I sympathise. I'm a bit slow this morning as well.
Can you see my screen, share screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, well, good. So good morning. Yeah, my name is Natalie Bain-Regius, and I'm working at Edinburgh Napier University. I'm going to try to answer the question, what standards are needed in education versus government standards. So the approach taken to answer this question was to do an international review of standards and guidelines related to the spread of airborne viruses in school buildings. So I'm not talking about higher education, but school buildings. The standards and guidelines of 19 countries were studied alongside the guidelines from reputable organizations such as the WHO, ASHRAE, RIVA, and CIBSI. So a quick definition of the differences between standards and guidelines. So standards and regulations are legally binding rules made and maintained by a government authority. They are enforceable by law. Failure to comply with standards can result in legal consequences such as fine, penalties, or other enforceable actions. Whereas guidelines, which are also called recommendations, are non-binding documents that provide advice or best practices. Unlike regulations, guidelines are not legally enforceable. So these are the different parameters or elements studied which are relevant to the spread of airborne viruses. The ventilation rates or the air change rates define if a room has adequate ventilation. They can be calculated using the CO2 concentration levels, measuring PM2.5 to evaluate the amount of particulate matter, the size of the airborne viruses. The relative humidity can have an impact on virus transmission. And it was important also to look at if sensors are deployed in classrooms, if occupants have users' guides and on how to use the sensors and how to ventilate efficiently. And finally, if countries have standards or guidelines related to air filtration or air cleaners. So there is a significant disparity in regulations and guidelines in classrooms around the world. So you can see in red the countries with regulations, where blue is only guidelines. So 10 out of the 19 countries have regulation or standards on one or more of the parameters of interest. In the UK, the regulations are related to education are devolved to each region. Therefore, England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland all have different regulatory texts. Now we are going to look at the maximum CO2 in classrooms. So knowing that the outdoor CO2 level is around 420 ppm, this graph shows for each country studied the regulation or standards which are in red and the guidelines in blue. The international organization guidelines, you can have them on your right, which are in green. The maximum CO2 levels acceptable in classrooms are lower when recent guidelines have been published, guidance and standards have been published. This can be assumed to be a consequence of the recent pandemic. So the strict maximum CO2 is 800 ppm in classrooms in France. Then it's 900 in Belgium and 1,000 in Denmark. In England and Wales, the maximum value varies from 1,200 to 1,500 ppm, depending on the type of ventilation. Whereas in Scotland, the latest regulation imposes CO2 levels to be less than 1,500 in classrooms and 800 in gym halls and in music rooms. The guidelines of the independent organization are stricter than most of the ones in the countries. The WHO gives two thresholds, including one in case of severe pandemic, which is of 800 ppm max. For the PM2.5, no countries have imposed standards. So we've got Germany and Portugal are following the WHO recommendation of 25 micrograms per cubic meter. About minimum ventilation rates, fewer countries have got regulation about that. The minimum ventilation rates are from 4 liters per second per person, which is in France, to 12.5 liters per second per person in Spain, and the average is 8 liters per second per person. So there is a big heterogeneity. Relative humidity, so 3 countries, Belgium, Japan, and New Zealand, are imposing strict limits to control the humidity in classrooms between 20 and 80. Others only have guidelines. In the UK, there is no current mandatory legal requirements to control the humidity, but numerous studies have identified that there is a sweet spot between 40 and 60. So because then if it's too dry, that would allow viruses to thrive and be more active. And over 60, then it's going to have mold development when it's too humid. So the trend towards incorporating CO2 monitoring in educational settings have been growing globally. There are countries that have introduced building guidelines encouraging the use of CO2 sensors in schools to monitor the air quality and enhance ventilation. In England and Wales, the Department for Education has distributed 300,000 CO2 monitors in schools. The Scottish government has given £10 million to its local authorities to buy CO2 monitors. It's the same in France, in Switzerland. But even in the countries where the deployment have been recommended, there is no mention of the type of the sensors needed. So there is a wide range of monitors. They can be visual, non-visual, equipped with an alarm or not, and some don't have the appropriate technology to be accurate. No countries have guidelines about sensors monitoring humidity or PM 2.5, and no guidelines about the user's occupants. About filtration, so when spaces are mechanically ventilated, the filtration can be done using MERV 13. It's a guideline done by ASHRAE, which is followed by several countries. HEPA filters are not universally mandated in classrooms. Some countries and regions have adopted policies to install them. So that's the case in France, in the state of Victoria in Australia, and in Chicago in the US. So my take away from all this is that this review revealed a significant disparity in regulations and guidelines in classrooms around the world. And these values, which you can see here, could be suggested as standards. So for CO2 limits, we could ask to be less than 800 ppm, PM 2.5 to be below 25 micrograms per cubic meter, ventilation rates for minimum of 4 liters per second per person. The humidity should be above 40%. And all the classrooms should have CO2 monitors with the non-dispersive infrared technology, and should measure as well the humidity and the PM 2.5. They should have a dynamic alerting system, being visual or acoustical, and all the classrooms should have a user guide. About filtration, when it's mechanically ventilated, they should be equipped with MERV 13 filters, and when the ventilation is insufficient, HEPA filters should be deployed in all classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. So Wayne Bates from the NASUWT union, where he's a health and safety officer, joins us from a very exciting location of a bike race, I understand. Wayne is going to talk to us about current protections in air quality monitoring, absence policies, and the penalising of families. So whenever you're ready, Wayne, over to you.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the invitation, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to coming to speak at the conference. It's very much appreciated. To start off, I think my session is titled sort of Current Protections, Air Quality, Absence Policies and Impact on Families. With regard to current protections, unfortunately, I think I could do this in one sentence. In most schools, there are none. I think we've moved into a post-COVID world where the vast majority of schools and employers are acting as if COVID doesn't exist and never has existed. So we're very much in the kind of business as usual environment. Say the things that we saw during COVID around social distancing, hand washing, hand sanitization, mask wearing have all slipped away. And I think one of the things that I was hoping for when COVID hit, obviously COVID was a very, very nasty thing, but I was hoping that there would be some positives that come out of it. And I was hoping that some of the positives would be around the kind of acceptance that we had, certainly in schools, that it was okay to come in while you were ill and spread your illness to everyone else. And I was really hoping that in the post-COVID world, that would become, or would still be unacceptable. There would be like a almost a stigma around doing that. And I don't think there has. I think we've gone completely back to where we were before, including, I mean, if we look at the guidance for schools regarding when staff and pupils have COVID, we're back to if they feel fit enough, they can attend. And I remember, having personal experience this when my daughter had COVID last year, ringing the school up, and they say, "Oh, send her back when she's fit. You don't have to wait for a negative test." Of course, there are no tests anymore, so unless you want to pay for them, so it's very hard to know if you're ill, whether you have got COVID or not, which again allows the virus to spread. So we're very, very light on precautions. Testing's non-existent. Attendance, school attendance has never reached, many schools has never reached the levels that we saw prior to COVID. So there's always been now a higher absence rate. It's not clear why that is. It's not clear if that's due to kids generally being sicker, or whether, I mean, one of the things that has been postulated is that a lot of adults and parents are still working from home. So whereas before COVID, they were more likely to send the children in, they're now more likely to keep them off if they're ill. I'm not sure whether I subscribe to that, but it is one of the ideas that's out there. But certainly, there is pressure on parents to send pupils to school as soon as they feel well. I'm not going to say as soon as they're better. As soon as they feel well enough, and of course, well enough doesn't mean that they're well, and it doesn't mean that they're not spreading the virus, whether that's COVID or flu or colds or norovirus. That's still going on. All schools are meant to have infection policies. If they are, or if they do, I'm not sure many of them pay much attention to them. It's all a bit, unfortunately, it's all a bit of a tale of woe. We've literally gone back in most schools to as if COVID doesn't exist. In terms of air quality, CO2 monitors were distributed to all schools during the first part of the COVID pandemic. I'm not sure how many of those are in use anymore. Certainly most employers and most schools are not insisting on their use. I don't go into schools very often. I tend to do the kind of higher level stuff so I'm meeting with employers rather than into schools. But when I do go into schools, I very rarely see a CO2 monitor in place and working. And of course, although there's guidance from various HSE, not so much DFE anymore around CO2 levels. I think in most schools, even if the CO2 does go up, other than opening a window, there's very little that teachers can do to mitigate against that. And certainly in terms of ventilation, again, this was something I hoped would be a positive of COVID. That pre-COVID, we had a lot of issues with poor ventilation in schools, particularly linked to excessive temperatures in IT rooms and things like that. And I was hoping that as we got more used to ventilating schools, that would persist. And again, I don't think it has. I think people have gone back to, particularly in the winter, I'm not going to open a window if it's drafty. I'm going to keep the comfort levels up, even though it shouldn't be a trade-off. There should be a happy medium. With regard to air filtration, the DFE issued a small number of air filtration units, but we as a union and with other unions have really been trying to push air filtration. Unfortunately, we've kind of given up on coming at it from trying to convince employers from a health and safety point of view. But what we have been trying to do is there's lots of good evidence out there that air filtration units have a significant impact on pupils' educational attainment. Equivalent in some studies, equivalent
Can
to...
I just ask you to come to a close? Sorry, Wayne.
Okay, yeah, I'll be very quick. So we've been struggling to get air filtration units into schools as well. Seems to be resistance from employers. Absence policies, again, we've gone back to business as usual. Long COVID, we've always had a mismatch between the numbers that were reporting in the ONS figures and the numbers that were reporting in schools. Never quite got to the bottom. Of course, the ONS have stopped collecting data now, and most employers just treat long COVID as any other long-term illness if people are off sick. And of course, that all feeds into the impacts on families, particularly through the push on attendance and getting pupils in, regardless of their own circumstances and their circumstances at home.
Thanks ever so much, Bain, and I'm very sorry that my technical issues mean that I missed the first part of your presentation. Hopefully it will work now. Our next speaker is Ruth Brooker, who is parent and campaigner, who's going to be talking to us about implementing protections in a primary school. Ruth, are you with us? Yeah. Whenever you're ready, Ruth.
I always have a panic that you can't hear me.
We can hear you, and what I'll do, similarly as with Bain, I'll just, when you've got about 30 seconds to go, I shall jump in and ask if you can come to a close, if that's okay.
Okay,
All right.
well, I've done it to a stopwatch, so let's hope. Okay. I don't know how many people actually know my backstory, but I'll assume you don't. So I have actually managed to get air filters into my primary school. I'm going to do something slightly different today to illustrate the reality of what that's like, of managing air filters in a primary. So I want to tell you the story of the school play. It's a little tableau that represents some of my experiences. So if you can imagine this scene, the school hall is packed with parents, kids and teachers. And there I am, stood alone on a big empty stage with coloured lights flashing in my face, the only adult there wearing a mask, like a rabbit in headlights, the only rabbit in a mask, carrying a big DIY air filter. The silent, penetrating eyes of hundreds of parents staring right at me, wondering what on earth was going on. Why hasn't the play started? 50 children in costumes waiting in the wings. Now I want to illustrate how this faintly ridiculous scenario came about. So I thought I'd got it all sorted. The day before, I'd been talking to my inside agent, the caretaker, Sammy, my domestic, 007. Please, can you make sure that these 3 air filters have been returned to the junior hall, because they get moved about by the cleaners. Here are the timers, so we know exactly when they're going to come on. And can we make sure those ceiling fans are working too? The windows in the 2 school halls don't open at all in this Victorian cranky old school. They've been painted shut. So to get anywhere near adequate, safe air, we must have 3 DIY air filters running. But as I calmly sauntered in after everyone else, one filter had been switched off, another one had been shoved behind the stage equipment, and the last of these big boxes had been unplugged and removed and dumped over the other side of the hall, shoved against the beanbags. I scuttled up to Mr. Smith, hissed at him, "Why is that over there?" "Oh, well, we needed the plug socket to run Mrs. Moppet's mobile phone, which has the music and it's out of battery." Through tense, gritted teeth, "Well, Mr. Smith, it's July, and there's a huge summer wave of COVID cranking up, and my son needs to deliver his line safely. He's only 11 and was playing Little Bo Peep in a Dolly Parton wig and a puffball dress I once wore to a wedding. But despite that, wearing a mask to shout his lines out was deemed too embarrassing." So I could see Mr. Smith doing an internal eye roll, looking completely unbothered about my concerns. Oh, I guess I've got to keep her happy. Because I'm the parent who has a little child, my son's younger brother, who's gone through cancer treatment, and it's pretty hard to argue with me. So this ridiculous Benny Hill sketch began. Me and Mr. Smith running about, diving into classrooms, trying to locate another nearby plug socket. I humped a massive air filter across the stage to a plug socket on the other side of the room that didn't work at all. Then I had to drag the air filter back across the stage in front of everyone. Eventually, with him shouting out, "Does anyone know where there's an extension cable?" Miraculously, one appeared and we got the filter plugged in the correct location. With a sweaty, red-hot face, I sat down and watched my son perform in his play as safely as possible.
Thank you so much.
What advice? So the next bit, what advice can I give to others that even in the best case scenario, this isn't smooth or easy? So I think I would suggest to first talk about illness with your community, your teaching community generally. I've found quite robustly so far that there is a blocker to talking directly about COVID to this traumatized teaching community. And to largely focus on positive gains, such as improved attendance and cognitive function. For me, I suppose on this journey, a key element is to build relationships. I'm now actually friends with Sammy, the caretaker, and I speak to the secretary, or have done over the last year, pretty much every day. So to thank her for my endless nagging, I bring her cake. And even when you're really pissed off about decisions and things aren't going your way, you smile sweetly and play the game, because we all have to work together and we want our kids there. Be prepared for an unbelievable amount of micromanagement, as I think that story has just illustrated. Endless emails, meetings, popping to the school at weird times, because putting portable filters into a school is an ongoing project. Interest wanes. Teachers are busy, stressed people with other priorities, and it's quite clear there's a lack of understanding over airborne spread of pathogens and the importance of better air quality amongst our communities and teaching staff, and there is resistance to change. I had an encounter with our business manager the other day where I was changing some filters over for the new year, and she said, "Oh, we've got quite a lot of these air humidifiers." Now, as this term starts, because I'm not actually working in the school, even though it feels like I do, I've lost a bit of control over what's going on. And our lovely caretaker's on leave, so I can't get my insider spy to tell me. Fortunately, I've just made a good connection with one of the teachers, and she's saying some really lovely right things. That's really made my day this week. I'm about to ask my head teacher if we can make a huge effort to get them all turned on every day in every school space over winter, to gather the data from the register and hopefully be able to see a measurable difference as we head into what is going to be a really large wave, I assume. My next plan is to gather everyone in my school community together, present the information of air pollution, and to get a concerted community effort and to get them to all understand why these weird boxes are around the school. To help other families and educators, together with Natalie Pearson, we ruined our summer holidays to get the Safe Air Schools Foundation set up before September. And if you can go to that website to download a poster on clean air facts for anyone in a parent's child's classroom, if you're interested, and to download a letter to send to an MP. We've just written a standard letter, and also one that's been adapted to head teachers. It has on this site a lot of facts and resources, all backed up by experts, which we hope will be of use to this burgeoning community. I'm done.
Thank you so much. And the recognition of being the sole voice in a mask trying to be heard is really powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us and all of the tips. And I think there are lots of links that went into the chat as well that you should be able to see, even though we're not using the chat for chatting. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Colin Pidgeon. Are you with us, Colin? Can we spotlight you? Okay, when you're ready, you'll also have 5 minutes, and I shall start waving at you when you have just under a minute left, okay?
Okay,
So,
I just need to share here.
Okay,
So a few slides.
No worries, we'll make sure they're on screen, and then once we can see them, I think if you expand that should be fine.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, whenever you're ready then, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to speak about my experience. I've done similar to Ruth, actually, and managed to get filters into a school. As long COVID kids, what we want to see is an acknowledgement of the risk of reinfection, widespread transmission amongst the community. We need suitable and effective air filtration, ventilation measures to ensure a safe environment. And so from that point of view, we would support mandatory mask wearing to prevent further transmission when cases are high, and if there's an indication that such a thing would be needed. I don't know how realistic that is, but it's a sensible approach. So my experience is with Dundonald Primary School, where all of my kids went, all 5 of them, between 2007 and my youngest, who finished there in 2024. My daughter Rosie, who some of you may be familiar with via Twitter from her artwork, she's 19 now and has just started art college. She has 3 different campus assistants. She has a laptop provided by the Education Authority with specialist software to help her read. She has note-taking software which she has to be trained on. She has home to campus taxi transport, all at a cost to the taxpayer of about £17,500 for 1 year. She's got a 4-year course ahead of her. So there is a real direct financial cost to this. She left Dundonald Primary School, and I was trying to work it out. I think it was 2016. She's still remembered by some of the staff who are still working there. My wife works there. Rosie's had long COVID since September 2021. She's still in a wheelchair. Cognitive function is bad, but she is just about, by the skin of her teeth, managing to make it into college. My wife, she's a P1 classroom assistant, has had reactive arthritis triggered by, we think, probably her 2nd, possibly her 3rd COVID infection. She's had 3 or 4. It's hard to know exactly. So Dundonald Primary School is the 2nd largest in Northern Ireland. It's about 800, I think it's 830 pupils, something like that. Around about 80 staff. This is actually increasing because in some cases you have diabetic children who need one-to-one attendance. I think last year in my wife's class there were 4 adults as well as all the kids. Current building's relatively modern, opened in 2006, but the windows only open about 2 centimetres. So yes, they have CO2 monitors, but even with the windows fully open, such as it is, they're quite often in the red zone, and I think they tend to get turned off and ignored. So now we've managed to get, I've got CR box into the computer room, which is cramped. You'll see from the picture there, it's not in an ideal position. I know they're supposed to be in the middle of the room. There's no way between those rolling chairs and things, you just can't put a CR box in the middle of the room. It's just not going to happen. So at the edge is better than nowhere. I don't think there's any windows in that room at all. Managed to get HEPA filters into every classroom. It's all 28 classrooms and the nursery unit. The school is a forest school, accredited forest school. They do, in the Key Stage 1, do as much as they can outside, but it is very limited because they can only have 1 class out at a time. There's 4 in each year group. So progress, but similar experience to Ruth, in that in order to get there, I had to rely on the relationship that I already had with the school. The former principal, who's now retired, was deeply affected, I would say, by Rose's disablement. The fact that my wife, who works there, has been disabled doesn't seem to have as much an impact, to be quite honest. Several colleagues we know have long COVID, but they don't necessarily recognise it as long COVID. It's very easy to diagnose from just talking to them about their symptoms. So it's an incredible uphill battle. So we've achieved this in 1 school. There are several hundred in all of Northern Ireland.
In the next sort of 30 seconds. Thank you.
Will do. Yep. So that was the school. In terms of progress elsewhere, myself and a bunch of other clean air campaigners, I suppose COVID aware people, have managed to use our connections with local councillors to get 3 councils: Belfast, which is the largest, Lisburn City Council, which is my one, and Newry and Mourne on the southern end, to adopt some sort of clean air motion and commitment to adopt the COVID safety pledge. But we're now a year on from that, and we haven't actually seen much in terms of any action. The idea was that they would be requiring, for example, an inspection of all properties, and anyone who was organising an event that was funded by Belfast Council was to do a risk assessment specifically on air quality. And in order to get funding, they would have to have mitigations in place. So we're waiting on more progress on that. Some other wins: I managed to get air filters into my church, and there's my 3 younger daughters all at the opening of Rosie's exhibition, proudly displaying a Causey Rosenthal box, which we managed to get in at least for the opening. So it can be done, but it's difficult, it's exhausting.
Thanks so much, Colin. And again, I think there are lots of links in the chat, and hopefully the links that you've shared will all be in the chat. I'm afraid I seem to have frozen, so I'm hoping you can all see me. It looks like I've frozen on my own screen.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Technology is not my friend today, I'm so sorry. So I just want to say thank you very much to all the speakers that we've had this afternoon, and I'm just going to hand over to Janet to talk about the statement. And then after that, we'll be going into the breakout rooms for discussion. And that discussion is really about how we can take this work forward and talking about the barriers that we need to overcome and tactics to do it. So over to you, Janet. And again, very sorry about all my technological issues today.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much. And a great speaker. It's great to hear the some of the exciting things that have been going on in schools, you know, and absolutely the hard work that you've had to put into trying to change things. So we've had if you've been in the session this morning, you'll have heard about the declaration, and really it's just to point you towards the declaration. So the session, the whole conference really is around trying to demand this right to breathe clean air wherever we are, in whatever workplace, whatever public place we are in, and and we should all have that right to breathe clean air, and it should be a legally enforceable right, you know. So there should be proper standards behind it. It shouldn't be up to different employers of different authorities to determine what that should be. We want proper standards, and we should be stopping and the consequences of that would be to stop reinfections. It would be to stop infections. It would be to help a cognitive process as well, like, you know, and to stop air pollution. And you know, I think that within the declaration it talks about how the pandemic's laid bare to inequalities in society, and really, you know, that's at the heart of what we're trying to address. So I want to have a look at the declaration. We want some suggestions. It's a living document. It's not something written in stone. But we want to use that to take forward, you know, from this conference. So in your breakout rooms, we're hoping that you'll discuss around the issues around education that you've heard this afternoon, but also to feed into the declaration as well, and to tell us what the shortcomings of it are, if there's things you need changing, or if there's things that need to be added to it, and in particular on education, in the education sector. So that's all from me, and it's over to you, Vicky, again.
Thank you. So I confess I don't 100% understand how the technological part of the breakout rooms works, but you are going to be beamed into discussion groups. So you're going to be talking about what works, what are the obstacles, and how we can work together going forward. And a suggestion, if it's possible, is whether we could have the Google Doc reshared into the chat in case anyone has joined us partway through, because I think you can't see the chat before you've arrived into the meeting, so that might help a little bit as well. So hopefully.
Okay. So I'm going to put you into smaller breakout groups. I might have to just move 1 or 2 people about just to make sure we've got not all the speakers in one group or that sort of thing. Actually, I think I've just...
It looks like we've just started to move some people because...
Have these people moved? Oh,
well,
right.
I think so.
I've not opened the rooms yet. So
okay.
right, okay. But what I've just seen is that that's not going to be very many. That's going to be too few people, I think, in there. Let me just see if I can do it. I can't do it anyway. I'll have to move you around a bit. Can I just say that so you're going to have a document that you can add to, a Google document, or you can email. So at the end of this session, we want somebody from each group to have taken notes, somebody from each group to sort of chair that session, and somebody from each group to take notes and send those to me, either by email or through the Google document. So if I'll try and put that all in the chat while you're going into your groups. But I just need to move 1 or 2 people around, and then, because we don't need to have so many people in the groups. Okay, and just move to 8. Right, I'll open the rooms up and just let me try. Emma, I might just have to sort yours out in a minute. Okay, let me just open the rooms up for you to go into. So you're discussing the issues around education, and you're also discussing the issue around the declaration.